Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you guys so much for clicking on this video. Today we're having McDonald's. I'm just keeping it simple. Chicken nuggets and fries with some sweet and sour sauce. I was going to call it some sour cream. Yeah, just keeping it simple today. I do have a true crime. But instead of eating a little bit and then doing the true crime at the end, I'm going to do it while I'm eating because it's just chicken nuggets and fries, you know? Just simple. It's what I wanted today. I should have grabbed some ketchup. Oh well. Have my water. And yeah. These are nice and fresh and crunchy. They gave me some napkins. Let me know how your guys' day is going. I have black lash glue on my finger. I thought I got it off, but I guess not. Because it's sticky. Alright, so today's case that I'm going to be telling you is the case of Cassie Jo Stoddard. Cassie, she was from a small southwestern town, I believe, in Idaho, called Pocatello. She was 16 years old at the time of her death. Now, Pocatello is a pretty small town. Most of the people there are known to be Mormon. And it was a pretty close community. Cassie Jo, she was known to get good grades. She really liked, she was very artistic, very smart, and very kind. She had a lot of friends. And there's only 3 that I will be talking about in this video today. First one would be her boyfriend, whose name was Matt. And then her other 2 friends were Tori and Brian. Now, she had other friends, but they don't pertain to this story. It was said that Tori and Brian both kind of had a little crush on Cassie. So when her and Matt got together, there was a little bit of jealousy, but they still continued to be friends. Now, this took place in the year 2006, and in the month of September, Cassie's aunt and uncle were going out of town. Her aunt and uncle lived on a big piece of property, and they had animals. So Cassie, she wanted to make some extra cash, and she agreed to house sit and take care of the animals while they were gone. So, to keep her company, she invited her boyfriend Matt over on the night of September 22nd, 2006, which I believe was a Saturday. And her aunt and uncle were going to be back on September 24th. So she was watching the house for that weekend. So Matt and Cassie drive to her aunt and uncle's house, and they are watching movies. And Matt had invited his friends, well, they were all friends, Tori and Brian as well. Tori and Brian drove Tori's little red car. I forget what model it was, but it was a little red car. And they drove it up to the property, and when they got there, Cassie gave them a tour of the house, just kind of showed them around, and they all hung out in the living room to watch a movie. They watched Kill Bill, I believe it was volume 2. And after a while, Tori and Brian, you know, they got kind of bored, and they decided that they were gonna go to the movie theater. They were gonna go watch a different movie. So they left the house at about 10 o'clock. It was just a little bit before 10 o'clock. Now, after Tori and Brian left, Matt claims that the power had gone out. So Cassie became a little scared, so Matt called his mom to see if he could stay at the house with Cassie that night because the power was going out. And they were 16 years old, so his mom, of course, said no because there's no adult supervision. You know, they shouldn't be doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. So, you know, the mom said no. And she headed on her way to go pick up Matt. His mom got to the house to pick up Matt, and when she got to the house, she offered to let Cassie stay the night. She told Matt, you know, you can't stay the night here, but Cassie can come over if she wants, you know, that way there's some adult supervision. And Cassie, being, you know, the honest girl that she was, she said no, she didn't think it would be right because she was getting paid to watch the house for the weekend. And, you know, she didn't want to do that. She didn't think it was the right thing to do. Now, honestly, I think that her aunt and uncle would have understood if the power was going out. I mean, it's this big house out in pretty much the middle of nowhere. The neighbors aren't, you know, it's a big piece of land. There's neighbors, but they're not like super close by. So I'm pretty sure her aunt and uncle would have understood if the power had gone out. But nonetheless, Cassie said no, and Matt and his mom went home. The next day, on September 23rd, Matt is trying to get a hold of Cassie, and he can't get a hold of her. So he ends up going to hang out with Tori that night. And he ends up staying the night at Tori's house. That night, Brian had started to get worried because he hadn't heard from Cassie all day. And he asked Tori if he could drive her up to the house to see if she's there, see if everything's okay, you know. He would have driven himself with his mom's car, but his mom had to work that day, so he had no car available to him. But when Matt asked Tori said that he couldn't. He only had a little bit of gas left, and that gas had to last him the rest of the week, and he didn't have any money to put more gas into it. So Tori said no. It wasn't until the next day, on the 24th, that Matt received a phone call from Cassie's mom. Cassie's mom was frantic on the phone, crying, saying, "What did you do to her? What did you do? You killed her." You know, accusing him of killing Cassie. And at this point, he was like shocked. He didn't know what was going on. He had no idea that Cassie was found. So on September 24th, Cassie's aunt and uncle returned back from whatever outing they were on. And they had a 13-year-old daughter, and who was Cassie's cousin, and Cassie's cousin was the first one to walk inside the house. And when she walked inside, she got to the living room, and that's where she found Cassie in a pool of blood, no longer living, no longer alive. I guess the crime scene was horrible. There was blood everywhere. Upon closer inspection, they realized that she had been stabbed. So they right away called the police. And after they got off the phone with the police, they called Cassie's mom. So detectives get there, and, you know, they're photographing the crime scene and everything. And they're trying to figure out who could have done this. And of course, just like with every other murder, the first person they look to is the significant other. The boyfriend, husband, you know, the crush, somebody who they're closest to intimately. So of course, Cassie's mom calls Matt. And detectives also call Matt, and they pull him in for an interview. And that's when detectives find out that Matt was the last one. Matt did leave Cassie there on September 22nd. And he had also mentioned that Tori and Brian were the last ones to see her there also. So they still had their suspicions about Matt. Matt, you know, told him everything that happened that night. And so then they pull in Tori and Brian for interviews. And Tori and Brian tell them yes, they were there, but they left at about 10 o'clock and they went to go see a movie. And they were both questioned what movie they saw. And none of them could give like a straight answer. They both just kind of vaguely said that whatever movie it was so boring that they can't remember what it was about. They had purchased a movie ticket for the movie Holes. And they couldn't remember what the movie was about. So after the interview, it didn't really sit well with detectives, and they were just kind of left with more questions. So then detectives bring Tori and Brian both in for a second interrogation. Now this time around, they were also doing lie detector tests. And Brian, he was so nervous, he started crying. Detectives could tell that something was up, that he was hiding something. Brian ended up confessing to the murder of Cassie, but he said that he's not the one that stabbed her. So the autopsy report came back that Cassie had been stabbed for a total of 29 times, and 9 of those stab wounds were fatal on their own. So it was a pretty gruesome discovery that the way her cousin found her and the crime that was committed. It was pretty gruesome. And Brian's basically blamed it all on Tori. He's the one that stabbed her. He was just kind of sitting back like, whoa, what was going on? He thought it was just going to be a prank and all this. So Brian tells them that yes, they were there. They went to scare them, but things took a turn. And Brian also led them to very incriminating evidence. So Brian he took them to Black Rock Canyon, where Tori and Brian had hid the evidence in a plastic bag. And when they went and recovered the evidence, they found white masks that had like red blood. It was fake blood, but they were like clown masks. They also found some knives, and they found like a piece of paper that had some writing on it. And they also found a VHS tape that looked like it had tried to destroyed, but they were able to put it back together and see what was on the VHS tape. Tori and Brian were known to be like these photography film geeks at the school. They liked to make movies. They were into horror movies specifically. Brian was he had a crazy abnormal obsession with the Columbine murders, and Tori had an obsession with the movie Scream, which had come out 10 years prior in 1996. Some even label this a real life Scream murder because Tori was so obsessed with it. He even made, when he was younger, he even made reenactments of the movie in his own like little home movies. So it wasn't surprising to see that there was a tape. And what was on the videotape is what's shocking. So according to court transcripts, the night that they were all at Cassie's aunt and uncle's house, Tori and Brian showed up to the house. And while they were there, Tori was able to go down and lock all of the doors except for one. He left the basement door unlocked. And then after Tori and Brian had left, they drove down a little ways down the road from her aunt's house. They parked the car, and that's where they changed into the masks. They had their knives. And before they went back up to the house, they recorded themselves. Now, I'll explain what was on the tape a little bit later, but what happened was they went back up to the house, they snuck through the basement door, and they hung out in the basement, and they tried to make some noise to get Matt and Cassie both downstairs in the basement, and that's where they were going to prank them and basically scare them. So they were trying to scare them and get them to come downstairs, and that didn't happen. So after that, that's when the power went out. They found the switch box. Now there's two different reports. Some people say they found the switch box where they would turn on and off the lights, and then there's another source that says that they cut the power, which I don't know which one to believe. There's two different ones, and I've seen it in multiple different sources, multiple different articles. So either way, the power was turned off, and it eventually came back on. And then that's when eventually Matt's mom came to pick him up. After Matt left, they cut the power out again, and they were expecting for Cassie to come back down. So they made their way upstairs because Cassie never came downstairs, and they confronted her in the living room, and then that is where the murder happened. And then that's when Tori attacked her and started stabbing her for a total of 29 times. Now, Brian claims to this day that he did not stab Cassie, not even once. He just was kind of shocked in the moment as to what was really going on. He didn't think it was really going to happen. He thought it was just going to be a prank like what they had planned. And then they left. After they did what they did, they left to Tori's house, and that's where they put everything, their masks and the videotape and a piece of paper and the knives inside a plastic bag, and they went and they took it up to Black Rock Canyon. They lit it on fire, and then they buried the rest of what didn't get burnt all the way. So when detectives recovered the evidence, they found the broken VHS tape, which the boys thought that they had destroyed, but they didn't. They were able to put it back together, and that's when they found the shocking evidence. So they had the masks, they had a piece of paper which had their plans premeditated, and they also had the weapons, the knives, and then they had this VHS tape. So when they put the tape on, what they found was the day before the murder, this was Friday, the boys were at school and they were in the library, and they recorded themselves saying, Cassie's the one, she has to be the one, she's too perfect, that's why. And they were basically apologizing to Cassie's parents for the fact that they had to kill her. And this was in the library during school. They skipped fourth period to do this, and they recorded themselves doing this. And you can see them on the tape writing it down. You can watch the videos on YouTube. So there's that day. That was on the 21st. And then later on that night, both of the boys are seen driving in a car Brian is the one recording, and he has the videotape. He's recording Tori, and Tori is basically saying, yes, it has to be Cassie. She's our friend, but, you know, she has to be the one. We have to make sacrifices. And he talks about how murder is illegal, but when you keep somebody from it, it just makes them want to do it even more. Just very disturbing things. The boys had also claimed that they wanted to be better than the Hillside Strangler and Ted Bundy, and that they were both amateurs and they could do better. Now, there's reports that there was a list of other people that were going to be their next victims once they were done with Cassie. So then, also on the tape was after the murder. So they didn't record the murder itself, but after the murder, the boys are both in the car. Brian, again, is recording, and Tori he's kind of frantic. You can tell he's like out of breath. He's like kind of freaking out a little bit, and he basically says that he killed Cassie. He stabbed her in the throat and saw her life just leave from her body, and he said it happened so fast. And then Brian was like, okay, shut up, we have to get our story straight, we have to get our act together, is what he said. So there it is, plain as day. They can't deny it, you know, very incriminating evidence. But Brian's plea, both of the boys' plea, was that it was just a prank. They were just going to prank them. It was all part of a scary movie that they were trying to film, an amateur scary movie. And one thing led to another, and they killed their friend Cassie. But the videotape and the piece of paper that they found showed otherwise. It was premeditated. They were going to, in fact, kill her. It wasn't going to be a prank. It wasn't just some amateur scary movie that they were filming. It was, in fact, a plan to murder Cassie. And this is their friend. Oh my God. It's so disturbing watching the video. It's just really crazy. So both of the boys, they were sent to trial because they tried to claim that Brian tried to claim that he, again, didn't have anything to do with the murder. He thought it was just a prank. He was just there along with Tori, and Tori did everything. And still to this day, he claims that. So both of the boys were convicted. They had mandatory life sentences. They both are serving life in prison without parole. Tori is in prison in northern Idaho, and Brian, he is in prison about 3 hours away from Pocatello. Tori's parents still visit him, and it's not funny, but Tori's parents think that he's innocent, that he would never do that. Like, that wasn't his son. That wasn't their son. His mom specifically is in denial about the fact that, you know, her son could commit murder, and premeditated at that. She's just in denial. She doesn't think that her perfect son could do that because he got good grades. He was such a good kid that she didn't think that he could commit a murder, which she is terribly wrong. And she also doesn't think that they should have received such a harsh sentence because they were only 16 years old. I have to disagree. I think that they got exactly what they deserved, and they need to stay in prison for the rest of their lives. No parole, no questions asked. They both filed for appeals right after their sentencing, but they both were denied. So they will be facing life in prison, and they can move on up if they wanted to. You only have so many appeals before you can take it to, I believe it's like the Supreme Court. So yeah, there is a mural at the high school that Cassie went to. It is still standing, and the town was just devastated by this. It was such a small town. They didn't ever think that it would happen in their town, especially coming from those boys. Cassie's mom is heartbroken. She lost her daughter in the most horrific way. And Cassie's aunt and uncle, they say that their home is no longer a home. Ever since the murder, they haven't lived there. They've been trying to sell their house just about every year, but they can't get it sold. They themselves say that house has a stigma on it ever since Cassie's murder there. And of course, they are the ones that walked in on the murder scene, and they suffer PTSD. The dad suffers from PTSD, and then the mom and the cousin, they both suffer from severe depression. And her cousin, remember, she's the one that walked in. She was the first one to find Cassie. And she has suffered from severe depression, and she has attempted to take her life on more than one occasion. And it's just really sad. No 13-year-old should walk in on that. Nobody should die in that matter, especially at the hands of who are your supposed friends. And I couldn't really find anything on Matt and how he's dealing, or he dealt with it. Because remember, Matt was with Tori the next night at his house, and Tori refused to take Matt to the house to see if Cassie was okay. Matt stayed at his girlfriend's killer's house, sick. So I don't know. I'm just speechless. Like, you killed your friend's girlfriend, and then he's staying at your house the next night. He's asking to go see her. Of course he's not going to see her because you know that you killed her. You know, it's just these kids, man. And it's scary to think that, you know, these videos that I put out, and like the true crime docuseries, documentaries, you know, stuff you see online, movies, people look up to that, and people that aren't right mentally, they will use these as like, they will study them, you know, and see what this person did and what this person did and how they could do it differently so that they can't get caught. And that is very scary to think about. But I personally believe that telling these stories and watching documentaries, more so for women, because there is a lot of women that watch true crime and stuff, I think it's more of like an eye-opener for you to be aware of your surroundings, and you to learn, like, maybe, you know, you should be telling people where you're going, especially if you're in an area that you don't know, or what type of like characteristics or signs you should be looking for that your life could potentially be in danger, you know. So they help, but they also hurt if it's in the wrong hands. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys know about this case, if there's anything that I left out that you think is very important and pertains to the case, go ahead and leave it down below. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in a new video soon. Bye!